Hi, everyone. Welcome to my session on Chatgpt and AI and health communication. Yes, the title was helped generated by Chatgpt, and you will learn more about that as we go along. I have a lot of great things to share today, so I'm going to jump right in and get us started. I wanted to start with thinking about what many of us have heard about Chatgpt. Most of the conversations I've heard within the last few months have centered around people and students cheating using ChatGPT. And that came about when ChatGPT launched on November 30th. And within the first 2 weeks, we already had students finding it and figuring out how to use it to write papers and answer exam questions. So there was a lot of hubbub about ChatGPT, what is this? What's going on? And students cheating. But it is more than that. We have since had articles about AI being used to write articles for the news, writing convincing fake scientific abstracts, being listed as an author on papers, being used to code and come up with malware, which is not great. And then even passing medical licensing exams. So there's all kinds of interesting conversations going on about ChatGPT and AI, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. So just to kind of give you a roadmap of what we'll be looking at. So I wanted to start with what are LLMs and chatbots and how do they work? Why is this happening now? What some of the limitations are, talking about some of the ethical questions and the risks. And then once you're significantly scared of all of that stuff, we're going to talk about what it can do and what good can be done and what's coming up and what's next. Okay, so to back it out, what are LLMs? LLM stands for large language model. Most people have heard of the AI chatbot built by OpenAI called ChatGPT, but there are many others on the market. Google has Bard, Jasper, Meta AI, Canva has magic text. There's a lot of them coming on the market. And what are these programs built for? So they're built to allow people to ask it a question and have it respond to you. So you can have it write things for you. You can have it code for you, all kinds of different things. And it has really taken off. So AI, when you ask it what it stands for, ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-Training Transformer. And it's a generative model, meaning that it can make new things, like write a story or a sentence. Pre-training means that it was shown a lot of examples before it started working with you. And transformer means it's a special kind of computer program that helps the model understand what words mean and how they're related to each other. So imagine it like a teacher that shows you many books and stories before asking you to write on your own. GPT is like that teacher. It's trained on a lot of examples, and now it's ready to help you write. So why are these the hot things all of a sudden? There was an article in the New York Times that talked about the AI race and how Microsoft and Google are choosing speed over caution. These have been in development for years at this point, but somewhere, someone made the decision, we have to be first. We're going to launch this and we're going to launch it now. And ChatGPT became available to the public on a wide scale basis, as I mentioned, on November 30th. And now it led to a cascade of new products. Just in the last month alone, there are over 2,000 new products that have been released that are using AI. So this is happening, and it's happening quickly. To show that, I wanted to show a chart of the time that it took different platforms to reach 1 million users. So if you look at Netflix, it took 3.5 years to get to 1 million users. Airbnb took 2.5 years. Facebook, 10 months. Spotify, 5 months. Instagram, 2.5 months. iPhone, 74 days. ChatGPT, 5 days. It took it 5 days to get to 1 million users. And it is now already over 100 million users, and it hasn't even been around for 6 months yet. So this is light years faster than some of the other platforms we've seen in the past. So in order to understand what you can do with it and what some of the risks and challenges are, you have to understand how they work. And I think this is really important. I don't think everybody really understands this. So this is the perception of how AI programs work. There's this perception that you ask the program a question and that there's some robot brain behind the curtain that it thinks about your question, does research on the best way to find an answer to that question for you, and then shares it with you. But that's not actually how it works. So it works. How you need to think about it is starting with how it learns. So this is a dramatic oversimplification of the process, but essentially there are source materials that are selected and fed into a program. Then this helps them develop a complicated statistical model that helps the chatbot be able to use the source materials to be able to develop answers that people have. And then there are trainers who ask the model questions and change the statistical model to help the program learn when it's getting the answers right and how to make the model better. So what goes into the model? This is really, really important to think about. Each program is different and is using different source material, and they are all proprietary, and they are not sharing with us exactly what is being fed into them. Chatgpt, one example, has released some of what's out there, but it's very vague about what it's including. So they have said some of the information fed into our model is web crawls, but we don't know how extensive those are, what sites they're looking at, what platforms they're using, anything like that. But we know it's looking on the web. We know it's looking at links on Reddit. We know that they've fed some books into the model, some that were published and some that were unpublished, but we don't know which books they put in there. And we know they also used some of the English language Wikipedia. Also really, really, really important to note is that all source materials for ChatGPT were materials that were published before 2021. So anything that you're asking it at this point, the version that is available for free right now, the data that was fed into it stops at 2021. So anything that happened after that is not in those models. So any new research, any news and events after 2021 is not in there. The other important thing to think about is the training. So what did they do with the training? What are they looking at to try and make it better? So what they're trying to train these models to do is they're trying to teach them how to put words and sentences together in a way that is most likely to occur in human speech patterns. So they're trying to predict, if you put these words in, what are the next logical words that come out? They're also trying to teach it about context. So this example of if somebody asks it what bats are made of, there are two choices, right? So it's trying to help teach them to figure out which of these two bats are they most likely to be talking about based on the context of the other words around it. And then they're also trying to match the emotional tone. Are the questions that are being asked more professional, more scientific, more casual, different kinds of things like that. So they're trying to figure out the best ways to mirror how humans actually talk in the context of the words. So when you're thinking about what they are actually doing, and again, this is an oversimplification, but it helps me to think about these examples and how the programs are working. So on the left, an example of predictive text that we've all seen is if you use Google and you start to type in a question, you can see that it starts to change what's in there and what pops up. So that's an example of predictive text. Another example that you might have seen is on your phone. So when you start typing in on your phone, you can see these words that pop up underneath and emojis that it thinks you might want to say next. So it's predicting what the next word might be. That's what these models are doing. They're not actually thinking. If you look on the one on the left, there's not a hidden robot behind the curtain. It's actually just predicting text. So while we think that there's a robot back there doing research, what is actually happening is a statistical model guesstimating what the next best word is likely to be based on the words in your question. So that's really important for us to understand. If you're not thinking about that and you're not aware of how it works, there's this perception of intelligence that's out there that isn't actually happening in some sense. And then also thinking about the fact that this kind of process can lead to lies or mistruths or things that sound real but really aren't. So I've typed in chats where I ask it to tell me something and then tell me where it got that information or what the proof of that is. And it's given me a journal article name and an actual journal. But because it's based on a statistical model of just guessing what the next best words are, it's been totally fake. There's no journal like that, and there's no actual journal article like that, because it's just looking at word prediction, not actually looking on the internet, at least in the versions that are out there right now. So that is really important for us to be aware of and to know. So now that you kind of know how it works, some of the limitations that are based on this are really important for us to think about with these products. So it's to know that these products are only as good as what you put into the model. And so I put a diagram here of just some of the things that can happen based on what's put into the model. So I mentioned already the dated information. All of the information from Chatgpt, at least, is before 2021. Stereotypes based on what data is put in, what resource material is fed into our model. It could have been resource materials that had stereotypes in it already, that had biases in it already, that had misinformation or even disinformation in the source materials, and even selection bias. How do you decide what gets put in there and who decides that, and what information are we sourcing from? All of that matters, and it's really hard for us to know because they're not telling us what is getting fed into the model. Also, with the model depends on the trainers, right? So when the trainer looks at an answer and decides whether or not it's a good answer, it is based on their own personal experience. Everyone, no matter who they are, sees the world through their own unique perspective based on their lived experience. So no matter how hard you try, and it's important for us to continue to try and be aware of our biases, but they are there, and you bring those biases with you. So it is going to be important for us as we move forward in this AI world to make sure that people training the models have a variety of voices and perspectives, and that they're all at the table, because they, just without even thinking about it and without trying and without purposefully adding stereotype and biases, we do know that those get added in there. And then even with the models, the speech and language patterns of the trainers are what's going to get modeled in the model. So if you have people with different backgrounds have a different way of speaking or different phrases or things like that are used, that might not make it into the models, which means it won't get put back out as output either. So just a visual example, because I'm a real visual person. So one person put into, this is one of the programs where it's creating visuals, and they put in a prompt: a wall in a royal castle. There are two paintings on the wall. The one on the left is a detailed oil painting of the Royal Raccoon King, and the one on the right is a detailed oil painting of the Royal Raccoon Queen. All they said was royal. The only direction was royal. But if you look at the outfits that the raccoons are wearing, they're Western style royal outfits. So these biases may be subtle and can go unnoticed by some, but they are being built into these programs even when they're not, people aren't trying to put them in there. So it is something that we really need to be aware of. And then the output also has limitations, because it is based on those statistical models and just what the next word might be. It can come up with nonsensical phrases, which aren't as dangerous because you can see that they're nonsensical. But when it becomes more dangerous is when, especially in healthcare and working with patients or public health, if it has something that actually can be a harmful instruction, there's no check on that if you're not careful. It can be putting out biased content based on what was fed into it. The other really important thing to talk about is it's not original. That was the way it comes up with the answers is it pulls the data of what it is out there in the universe, and it is created based on that. So it's not putting out original content. It's just a mishmash of content that was already out there. And again, it can be most dangerous when it's plausible sounding, but has incorrect data. I've done a couple of times where I've asked it to, yeah, I work in injury prevention, and I've asked it to come up with recommendations for how parents can prevent their child from being injured. Sometimes it's great, but other times it sounds really good, but the recommendation is actually wrong. And it's not the right recommendation. And if you're not really closely paying attention to that, or you aren't 100% aware of what the recommendations are yourself, you could be sharing information that is not the right information. So you really have to watch that. And then the output does, because of the statistical modeling, it repeats phrases a lot. So there are things, you kind of need to pay attention to that. There are lots of controversial uses. I'm just going to show one of them that I thought was really interesting. So there was a company that actually used Chatgpt to do a mental health experiment. So they had online counseling sessions, and they had some of the sessions, people did not know that Chatgpt was answering them instead of an actual therapist. So this guy tweeted, "We provided mental health support to about 4,000 people using Chatgpt. Here's what happened." They did not tell the people that it was not a therapist, which is really controversial. So this is kind of what it looked like. The question would be asked here, and then Chatgpt would respond. And they came out and said messages composed by AI and supervised by humans were rated significantly higher than those written by humans on their own. Response times went down 50% to well under a minute. And yet we pulled this from our platform pretty quickly. Why? Once people learned about the messages and that they were co-created by a machine, it didn't work. Simulated empathy feels weird, empty. So they acknowledge that, but this is the kind of scary thing that we have to be careful about, because this is a direction where some companies are starting to think about how can they replace humans, and we have to be really thoughtful about what we're going to say is okay for the use. Some additional challenges are there's no easy way to identify mis and disinformation, because it doesn't tell you where the content came from. And even if you ask it where it came from, it's not actually telling you where it got the information, because it's not thinking, it's creating a model, right? Again, I mentioned that it's not new ideas either. So it's great for a lot of things, but not if you're trying to come up with new, fresh ideas. And then also, it's going to, and already has started to, move to a fee-based model, which is going to increase inequality, is who is going to be able to access and use these programs and who isn't. So all things to think about. I also wanted to talk about the ethics around some of these. There are many, many, many ethical questions. There are a few that I am going to bring up here that I think are really important for us to think about. So where the source data comes from. I've been talking about this a lot, but from a different kind of angle here, all of this data is scraped from other people's work, and it is being used without their permission. So this is true of text, but it is also true of artwork, photography, music, all of these being used to create digital images and music. And is that okay? If I'm an artist and my whole life's work is on the internet available for purchase, and these programs are using it and creating new images from it that are going to maybe put me out of job, and straight out just using my work without my permission, is that okay? There's no blocks on that right now. And writers and creatives have fear that they're going to lose their jobs to a program that was created using their work. This is an example. I used a program called DALL-E, which is an artificial intelligence image generator. I couldn't find an image of a robot that was a thief, and I had it create this for me, and it did it in under a minute. So, and it gave me 4 or 5 different options. So there are programs that you can use right now that are pretty quick. There's also questions of responsibility. Who is going to be responsible for AI mistakes and errors? This can be true in text, like I mentioned, in terms of if we're giving out misinformation, even if we don't realize it, but it can also be true in terms of, other AI programs like, Tesla has this self-driving car that was in a crash. Who's at fault there? Is it the driver? Is it Tesla? Is it someone else? Who's at fault here? And this will become more and more important as we think about things like having self-driving ambulances enter the market and other things like that. So we really need to answer some of these questions that we haven't been really doing a great job of answering yet. And then we also need to think about who's responsible for deciding where the plagiarism line is. How much, where's that line of, okay, we used your work to give us ideas versus, nope, that's actually mostly my work. And who gets to decide that? We have to answer these questions. Inequality is another really important thing that we need to think about with these AI programs. As I noted, some of the costs for these programs are going to price some people and some nonprofits out of being able to use them. And then how will the wealth that's being created by these programs be distributed? Who gets to capitalize on these? Especially, if you're using my work as a writer, shouldn't I be getting some of that? I don't know. It's hard to say, but how can you tell how much my work influenced that? So we have to answer some of those questions. And then there are going to be a significant number of people that lose jobs to these programs. And how are we going to manage that? And what does that look like? Been talking a lot about biases. We have to really think about what the biases are. So we know there's biases in the data that's entered into the models. We know that there's bias in how the programs are developed. So some examples of, there have been software that is being tested to use to detect future crime, and it has showed a bias against Black people. There are facial recognition programs, and they have a harder time with non-white people. Even bias in how the programs are being used. You can use some of these in nefarious ways, or maybe even using them in ways where you're not realizing the biases that are in there. We know that, in maternal health, Black women have different rates than white women in maternal health. And if the biases in the program are built into that, and we're trying to build a program to identify that, but we're not acknowledging the biases, it's going to be flawed from the start. So we have to think about some of those as we're building. And there's, unfortunately, the bad people that come in as well. So these programs are going to be open to hacking and mis and disinformation campaigns. Once people figure out, now some of these programs it's controlled what goes in there, but the goal is that they're going to learn from all of our information, right? Even Chatgpt now, when you use the free version, you have to say any of my prompts that I put in here can be used to train this in the future. So they're using all of our information now. They're collecting it. They're seeing what we're asking about, what we're putting in there, and they're using that in the back end to train the next generation of ChatGPT. So once hackers figure that out, they can start putting information in there that will then add more mis and disinformation. What does that look like? How can we stop that? And then deep fakes are going to be something that can happen and are already starting to happen. Very soon, it will be easy to create a photo or video that look and sound realistic enough that it'll be hard to tell what is true and what is not true. And I put a doctor on here because I can imagine a scenario where a trusted doctor someone creates a video of them saying something that they don't believe to promote something like, vaccine use or why you shouldn't use it, or, whatever your goal is. And the doctor won't be able to control that, and people will think that it's real. So thinking about some of these deep fakes will be really something important. And then even the questions of authorship. So some people already have started publishing listing ChatGPT as an author. What does that look like? When is it okay? Where's the line? Is it okay if they generated the work or just if they suggested improvements for the writing? We need to think about all of these things. We also need to think about caution. How can we use this? It's out there. People are using it. So what are the kinds of things that if we're going to use it that we have to think about? So I wanted to show this example. I love this. So accuracy is something that we've kind of talked about a little bit. but I think is really important. So I actually had it write me a 3-paragraph bio on me that focuses on injury prevention and health communication, because there's other Tracy Meehan, so I wanted to make sure that it got me. So I wanted to point this out. So it says Tracy Meehan is a renowned expert in injury prevention and health communication with over 30 years of experience in promoting effective policies and initiatives. All true. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication from the University of Pennsylvania. Nope. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Princeton, and a Master of Public Health degree in health, behavior, and education from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I have a Master in Communications from the University of Pennsylvania, where it got the other thing. And I'm currently working on a PhD in health behavior and health promotion at Ohio State. So it's really close, and it gets some of it right, but it's not right all the way, right? And you can see. And then it goes on to say how I served as the director of the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Well, I would love to have that title. I definitely have not done that. I have worked with the director. I work with the CDC all the time, but I am definitely not the director. And then it goes on to say about how I have consulted for numerous organizations, including the World Health Organization and the United Nations. I have worked with those organizations. Saying I was a consultant for them probably is a stretch for that, right? So it's that the danger comes in where it's close to the truth and there are hints of the truth, but it is not actually true what it is saying. In case you're wondering, apparently I even got a National Public Health Leadership Award for Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Also not true. So it made me sound really, really great, but there are a lot of misinformation in there. Other accuracy concerns, as I just showed, content that sounds good, but is factually incorrect. And again, this is particularly dangerous if you don't know what the recommendations are yourself. For instance, if you have an intern or someone new to the field of health communication, or for us, injury prevention, if I have them write it and I don't really carefully check it, that information might be wrong, even though it sounds really good. And what we don't want to do is make claims that could lead to harm if people follow them. So it is really important to fact check everything and don't get fooled when it sounds good. You really have to fact check it if you're going to use it. Hallucinations is another thing that is pretty big in the AI bots right now. So a hallucination is defined as a confident response by an AI that does not seem to be justified by its training data. So I already mentioned the fake citations. So that's an example where it sounds really good, sounds like it's a real article in a real journal, but it's not. But it can also be inaccurate data. And so I just made up this example, but an example could be a chatbot with no knowledge of the number of firearm-related injuries in the US in 2023, remember, because it doesn't have data past 2021. It might pick a number at random that it considers to be plausible and then continue to use that number repeatedly with no awareness that it made up the number and that is not correct. So if you have somebody who isn't aware of the background and the types of information that are in there and that hallucinations are a thing, they may see, oh, here's this number that sounds plausible to me, and they might start using it. And now all of a sudden that number gets out into the world and people are using that number and it's not true. So we have to be careful about that. And again, this is another image created using DALL-E. When I couldn't find a good image for this, I had it make one for me. Another caution, proprietary content. You really have to be thinking about and careful about anything that you put into programs like Chatgpt, because they become a part of their learning and can be accessed by anyone. So you don't want to put anything in there that you don't want out in the world. Already we've seen Italy banned Chatgpt over privacy concerns. It is now back up, but they did ban it for a while. Samsung has banned Chatgpt among employees after there was a code leak. Somebody was trying to improve code and put it in Chatgpt, and that code made it out into the world. So you have to be really careful about what you're putting in. Okay, so I have sufficiently scared you, got you to think about some of the challenges, but I do think we can actually use this. So what can it do, and how can we use it responsibly? So some of the helpful uses for AI, and this is just, again, a smattering, and there's so many different things you can do, but you can use it to save time. I've seen some really cool things in it being used to increase patient health literacy. You can create personalized interactive learning materials. It can improve grant and research writing and communication, and it can be used to increase representation in health communication if we use it well. And again, that is just a small sample of the examples, but those are ones that I thought we could start with, and I'm going to give some examples. So if you haven't been to Chatgpt, this is what the screen looks like when you sign in, the free version. So it gives you some examples that you can ask. It tells you what are some things it can do, and it acknowledges some of what the limitations are. So you just type in a message right into the chat bar there, and I wanted to show you how quickly answers come out. So I asked it, what are the most common questions people ask ChatGPT? That's how quickly it answers. It comes up with answers so quickly. So it is fascinating to think about how, with that amount of speed, you can ask questions and it will come up with almost anything you want to think about. So I'm going to give us some examples. So some things people are using it for are repetitive writing tasks. So writing letters to insurance companies, which is, I put an example here, asked it to do something and it spit out a letter. Is it one that I would use exactly? No, but it's a great start. And if you get it to start for you and then you save it, then you have examples of things that you do all the time. You can use it to generate first drafts of writing. You can use it to do patient-friendly descriptions of procedures on post-procedure instructions. We can even use it to address health literacy. You can put in a prompt, explain whatever you're asking it to explain at a middle school level or an 8th grade reading level or things like that. And it can generate some text that will help you do that. I'm thinking we can use this for things like IRB, and patient consent forms. Those are really hard and difficult sometimes, but if we put in some of the language, because you can copy and paste language into it, it can spit out models that help you maybe help the patients understand more. It can improve patient communication. So a study just came out yesterday, actually, about how researchers found patients preferred AI-generated messages for quality and empathy over those from healthcare providers. So, they go on to say it could be a game changer for clinicians and communicators who understand empathy's crucial role in patient communication, but are often under time restraints. So maybe there are things that we can do to help improve some communications. It can also you can use it to help organize trainings. I've just been, every time I do it, I'm doing a task. I start to put in questions to ChatGPT to see how will it respond? What does it look like? So for this talk, I said, create 10 catchy titles for a talk on whether or not AA platforms like ChatGPT are useful for public health. And it spit out 10, and I can pick from any one of those. I had it write a description for a webinar titled ChatGPT AI in Public Health, a game changer or a cause for concern. It spit out a description for me. I asked it to write learning objectives for this webinar. I then asked it to create an outline for a 45-minute talk on the benefits and risks of using ChatGPT to address health literacy and public health. Oops. Now, what you won't see in there is I did not use any of those exactly. I used it to give me ideas because I know the area and because I know how to do the presentations. I know what should be there and what shouldn't. I will admit there were a few times where I was like, oh, I didn't think about that. That's a great idea. I should include that. But there were also other times where I was like, nope, that totally missed the mark. So I would use it to generate ideas, but not straight out exactly what it spits out. But it can be helpful to help generate ideas. We can also use it to aid in comprehension. So for this one, I do injury prevention with child injury prevention. So I asked it, explain how to properly wear a bicycle helmet to an 8-year-old. So this is what it spit out. And I wanted to point this out right here. Right now, ChatGPT is free, or there is a free version. You can also use a paid version, which is more advanced and has learned. But in order to use the free version, you have to guarantee that, or you have to acknowledge that they can use your prompts and they actually want you to help it learn. So it asks you, give feedback on this. Is this prompt good, or is this response good, or what can I learn and how can it be better? And you can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So the cost of using it for free is they get to use your data and they ask you to help train it. I also then said, okay, that was pretty good, but there's some pretty complicated words in there. Rewrite the answer using fewer complex words. And it took all of these paragraphs and distilled it into this couple sentences, which actually wasn't too bad. So, and it did it all within 2 minutes. So these are the types of things I think we could potentially use this for. We can also start to ask it questions about what people are understanding about existing health disparities, or at least how they are perceived, right? And again, these are not going to be all inclusive. They could have errors, likely to have some errors, but it can be a good way to get conversations started, as long as you're thinking about and being aware of the biases and stereotypes that are in there. But I asked it, what are the health disparities related to drowning among children? And it talked about socioeconomic status, race and ethnicity, access to swimming lessons, access to safe swimming areas, disabilities and language barriers. And these are all really good things. Is it all inclusive? No, but it is a great start, especially if you're somebody new to this space. What are some of the things I need to think about health disparities in this population? You can also use it for ideas on how to talk about and share research, whether it is your own research or research that you are reading that you think are relevant to the populations you serve. I think this can be really important. So I took one of our articles that was on golf cart related injuries because I just wanted to see what it would do with it. Now, with ChatGPT right now, you are limited to the amount of text you can input into it, but you can copy and paste small amounts of information in there. So for right now, you can't put the whole paper, but now within the last month, there are programs where you can do that. And I'm guessing with ChatGPT, eventually you will be able to do that as well. But for the purposes of this, I copy and pasted the discussion section of the research paper into ChatGPT and asked it some questions. So I said, what are the main points of the article? And it summarized it for me. Then I said, okay, explain these findings to me like I was 10. And it did a pretty good job. Imagine you're playing mini golf with your family and you decide to take a ride on one of those little carts. Okay, well, mini golf, you don't usually use carts, but you can change that to golf, right? And then it says, well, turns out that a lot of people are getting hurt while riding on those carts, not just on the golf course, but also in other places like neighborhoods, campgrounds, and parks. The study found that over a period of 11 years, more than 150,000 people were hurt while riding on these carts. So it's actually doing a pretty good job. So I can use this to talk to kids, but I can also use it with my researchers in some cases to say, you're talking too high of a level, too scientific, too researchy for the general public. Put a prompt into ChatGPT to explain your research in a way that is easier for the general public to understand, and look at the language that it uses. That's kind of how you want to think about talking about it. And I'm excited about what we're going to be able to do with that. Again, you will not be able to use it exactly, but it gives them some ideas of how to talk about some of the complicated research. I then went further and said, create 5 Twitter posts based off of this study. And it did it. And it added hashtags that are relevant. Again, you want to check all of those, but it had some of those things in there. And then I asked it, write a script for a doctor to talk to the parent of a young child about the findings from this study. And it wrote a script out for me, and it did a pretty decent job talking about some of the things that parents might want to be aware of with us. I also asked it to write a letter to a golf cart manufacturer asking them to improve their golf cart designs based on the findings from the research. And it wrote out a letter saying, here's the areas where we found golf carts and the design of golf carts may be causing injury. Here's some things you can do to make it safer for people to use your golf carts. Which I thought was great. We can now also use AI for lit reviews, which can be really important for all of our communication messages and thinking about how we can do this. So ChatGPT is not a great resource for that, but there are some new ones that have started to come out that I think are much better for this. So some of the top ones I've seen are Elicit, Scholarcy, and Cite. And I put a little video in here so you can just kind of see how these programs work. So you ask it a research question and it starts to look and it pulls up some paper titles. And these programs actually do use real programs that it goes to the internet and looks, so you can rely on these a little bit more. You can look at the source, you can figure out what year it is, it'll save PDFs. It actually will do in here what population characteristics are. You can see that it's doing that. You can look at the number of citations, how many participants the studies are based off of, and all kinds of extra. You can add all of these different custom columns in here, which I think is really exciting. Some of them will even create flashcards for you, and you can save all of this information. And for many of them, you can actually share it with others. So you can share links to your library. So there are some really cool programs that will help you do lit reviews. Again, you should not rely on them solely, but they are a good place to start in many places and do a great job with helping categorize the important information from the study. Okay. I also wanted to look at translations. How is it doing on translation? So this image is actually a graphic that we designed as part of a campaign that we were doing on safe sleep. And so the image on the left is what we actually created. And I asked it to translate the text from that. The one on the right is what we used. What you see under here is the answer. So it came up with. It is pretty close, and some of the words are just slightly different. It's the difference between how you translate the word give. Are you offering, or the different kinds of languages, tones that you use, but it was actually fairly close. And what I could do with that then is maybe have it translate for me, and then use my translation budget to ask the translator to check this as opposed to create the translation. So saving money that way potentially. Grant writing is another thing that you can do with it. I have seen people use these programs to rewrite or shorten or summarize text that they're thinking about submitting, editing for clarity or readability. And this is true with journal articles as well. Creating charts, graphs, visual aids, identifying potential partners that you maybe didn't think about to invite to the table to be a part of this, and even tailoring to grant requirements or specific funder styles. You can ask it to do all of those things as it learns. With the big caution, remember, do not add any confidential information in there, or if you have something that's really unique and new, you don't want to put it in there, at least right now, because it can be out there in the world. In theory, we're hearing that there may be some new programs coming out that you can keep dark so that it's not shared, but that is not available right now. How well these programs do are all about how good you are at writing prompts. So what ChatGPT and other AI programs are only as good as the person writing the prompts. It's a great tool, but you really have to think about learning about what is called prompt engineering. There are lots of great resources out there for ideas for prompts. There are Reddits, it's on Discord. There are people on TikTok who are sharing ideas for prompts and how to do it. LinkedIn, Twitter, all of these are great places to go and look up prompt engineering or ChatGPT prompts, and you'll find a resource, ton of resources out there. So if you are going to start doing this, starting to think about how you write your prompts will be really important. Okay, so kind of summary of some of this AI stuff. So how can we use it, and use it thoughtfully and helpfully? So if you think about using ChatGPT to help create your structure, while you create the content that grows in the structure, that can be a good use. I also like to think of ChatGPT as like an intern. It can get you about maybe 70% of the way there, but you need to do the work to bring your voice and your expertise to get it right and have it be original. And also, always, I know I've said this, but always assume that the data is wrong and fact check everything. Okay, we've talked a lot about the text-based chatbots. I just wanted to give a few examples of images because I do think this is important. These are just a few examples of programs that create still images. And there are also programs like Canva and Vyond and Microsoft that are incorporating AI into their video programs. So there's more coming. This is an example of an AI-generated version of Vermeer's painting, Girl with a Pearl Earring. If you have seen that painting before, it is pretty good likeness. I talked about deep fakes before. This is another example of an AI-generated image of President Biden giving a speech. If you look at his hands, if you look at his face, you can tell right now that it is not real. But I'm telling you, when I started looking at these programs 6 months ago, they have come light years ahead of where they were even 6 months ago. So pretty soon, it's going to have learned enough to get us to that point where it looks realistic. One of the constant challenges for me as a communicator is to find no or low cost photos that show diversity and correct health behaviors. It's constant struggle for me. And we hardly ever have a budget for a photo shoot. And so I'm limited on what I can find online. And these programs may be able to help increase our diversity with a click of a button. So I put in a prompt. This is using Dolly, a photo of a 10-year-old African-American boy wearing a correctly fitted helmet. And it took a few minutes. This takes a little longer, but not that much longer. And it spit out these 4 images. And first glance, they're not horrible. And so when I zoomed in, I gave it another prompt and I zoomed in a little bit. And if you look at these, they're starting to get pretty close. These look like real kids. If you look, these two, if you know helmets, they're not exactly fitted right. They're a little too high, but this one, pretty close. This one on the right, the strap isn't actually a real strap, but again, we're getting closer. And there may be times where I'll be able to use this soon. I had to share a couple of these because it is okay when you do one person and it's kind of zoomed in on the face. When you start to ask it to do more complex images, it is not quite there yet. So when I asked it to look at a family, you can see the hands aren't right, the bikes are missing parts, the face is kind of scary. Some more examples. Sorry, hopefully I'm not giving you guys nightmares, but you can look like the handlebars aren't even there. The hands aren't quite right. So we're not quite there yet. Oh, this one has an extra foot. This girl's got 3 feet. So we're not there yet, but again, we're moving closer and I'm hoping we'll be able to do that. They do have a cartoon version. And some of these aren't too bad. You may be able to use some of the cartoon versions. So I would encourage you to take a look. Again, I just did the same prompt with a cartoon and it spit some out. And I looked at this one. This one's actually pretty good. And I might actually be able to use that. So I think there are some things we can do. Voiceover and sound is kind of the newest thing that people are talking about. There was somebody who asked one of the programs to create a song that sounded like Drake. And it was so good that people actually thought it really was Drake. And The Weeknd was also involved in that. And so this is starting closer to that deep fake, right? Like it's scary that you can have these programs spit out something that the artist can't even protect. And some people even said they liked it better than real Drake songs. So what does that look like for us? I bring that up because it's scary, but also, again, in terms of increasing the diversity of images out there in the space. And we know with health behaviors, if you don't feel like the messages are aimed at you or you can't see yourself in the messages, it's hard to connect with them. But if we have voices that sound like our communities and images that look like our communities, we might be able to reach people without having to have expensive photo shoots and voiceovers and things like that. So there are some potentials that I think are good here. I'm not going to play this whole thing, but this is an example of a video, and I just wanted to put a little bit out there. This was all created, 100% created using AI.
In a galaxy far, far away, prepare for a reboot like never before. This summer, Wes Anderson brings you a side of the Star Wars universe you've never seen before, the Galactic Menagerie. Join this ragtag crew of unlikely heroes as they
So you can see it's not exact images, and you guys may or may not be able to hear the sound on that, but you will have access to this, or you can look it up. I put the link there. It has voice that sounds really good, and there are things you can do with it. So already we're starting to get good video if you have people that know how to work and do the prompts.
In a galaxy.
Okay, so what's next? Coming soon to a computer near you. We are going to move and already have started to move to paid versions of these. So already we're starting to see, I have the free version of Chatgpt because I want to stay there because I want to know what the free version does. But people who can afford to pay are getting much better responses because their Chatgpt, the paid version, is much better because it's been using the prompts of all of us that are using it for free to train it and make it a better program. Hopefully soon we will also start to be able to see watermarking on content, so you can see and it'll be identified that it was AI generated. So we'll know this was written by a real person versus AI generated, hopefully. Some of the programs are starting to work on being able to identify the source of the information, and some are starting to do that already. We're going to see a whole new set of careers that a year ago didn't even exist. I talked about prompt engineer. Prompt engineers have kind of been around for a while, but there are a ton of listings out there now. And if you can do coding, there are prompt engineer jobs now that are in the $100,000 to $200,000 salary range. This didn't exist in this level before as it is now. We're going to have AI trainers, AI auditors, AI ethicists, machine managers, all of these new job titles that weren't even around or weren't around to in a big way until recently. We're also going to have the loss of careers, and it is something that we really need to think about. I listened to a talk from the CEO of Turnitin, which is the plagiarism software that many colleges and high schools use to check students' papers. He said that they already have a plan in place to cut 80% of their software engineers in the next 18 months. So within 18 months, 80% of their software engineers are going to be laid off. And they're not alone. IBM has already announced that they have stopped hiring for almost 8,000 jobs that are finance, accounting, HR, jobs that they think AI is going to be able to do instead of people. Dropbox laid off 16% of its staff and cited AI as the reason for that. So these layoffs are coming, and we need to be thinking about what that means for us. We're also going to see, I just wanted to share this video here. So this is a company called Vyond, where they do those like whiteboard videos or cartoon videos. And they are going to be launching soon this platform called Vyond Go, where you can type in the chat box what type of video you want. And within seconds, they are going to have a script and a video created that you can edit. And it's going to change things. We know right now health communications are very visual, and especially younger patients and families, they go to the visual. They want to see things. And if we can create videos like this where we don't have to have hours and hours and hours of staff time, but we can have these creating videos that have relevant health information, it's going to get us into that space in a different way. So there are exciting things on the horizon. So I wanted to just have one conversation about the singularity. So some people fear the singularity, which is that point where computers become smarter than humans and take over. Some people are starting to argue that that tipping point is already here. As I mentioned, in the last month alone, there are over 2,000 new AI-based programs that came out just in the last month. This AI is already out in the world. And it is going to change how we do things. And there is no going back at this point. So what are we going to do with the tools, and how can we use them to change the world for good is a question I want us to all think about. I did also want to end here with the thought that as of right now, humans are still needed My screen is frozen here for a minute. But when it goes on, I'm going to show you this great picture of why humans are needed. Oh, and I'm seeing there are some questions. So since I'm almost done and my computer is frozen, I'm going to answer some questions for a moment. So someone asked, as companies are adapting ChatGPT as part of their workflow, what are your thoughts on AI being used to generate patient-facing materials? Ooh, okay. All right, I will get to that in just a second. Let me just finish up here. So humans still needed. I love this picture. It is of the iRobot or Roomba type vacuum cleaner where it just goes and cleans for you. But the picture is of a human sweeping up the store where they're selling the iRobots, which I thought was really great. But also it just is a great example to me to kind of show that while AI and some of these platforms have the potential to be really helpful, humans are still needed to finish it off and to have unique and new creative ideas. If we only go to AI, that means we've kind of stopped with what the new ideas are. And we don't want to do that, right? As a race, we want to continue to come up with new and better ideas and new ways to interact and new ways to do things. So it will be great for a certain set of things, as long as we acknowledge the limitations, think about all the risks we talked about, and thinking about how we can use it for good. If you are interested in more information, our website, CERTC, which is the Center for Injury Research, Translation, and Communication, so it's certc.org, or you can take a screenshot of this QR code. We have put up a page that has a few AI resources on there. We will continue to add to it. I know it says injury research, but all of these are not related to injury. This is AI in general, so they can be helpful for anyone. And it's a good place to start if you want to learn some of the prompts and some of the programs that are out there. And then if you want to contact me, thank you for inviting me. And here's my information as well. So hopefully this talk was helpful. And now I'm going to go back to those questions. Okay, so companies adapting ChatGPT as part of their workflow, patient-facing materials, generating photos in place of using photos of models from the photo shoots, wondering how patients would react to patient-facing materials featuring AI-generated photos on retention and recruitment materials. So I showed some examples of how I think that can work. I do think it has potential. I think, as with everything, we need to have humans involved. We need to have our audiences in the conversations with us. We need to create them, have them have a seat at the table. What do they want to see? What is missing from their conversation or from their materials that they see? And how can we invite them into the space? And is this what they're looking for? And do they respond to it? I think as long as we are open to those, I think it has potential. Someone else talked about not wanting to use AI to write educational materials, but played around with it to have it reword materials at a lower grade level using health literacy. And what are the legalities around this? So legalities right now, I mean, that's one of the issues, right? We are behind. These programs came out really almost before the legal world was ready for it. They knew it was coming, but they weren't ready for it to launch. So we're in this murky gray space right now of what is legal and what is not. I think if you're using your own materials and you're using it to work on grade level and health literacy, I think that is okay personally, but you have to have some conversations about what that looks like, right? And I actually think some of the work that I've seen, again, it's not perfect, but it can help you do some of those translations, as I like to call them, to help us think. Now, remember, it is statistically based modeling, so it is not actually using some of the health literacy programs and checkers that we know. So you have to be aware of that, but it can help with the language. So someone, copyright considerations when using AI for patient education in hospital clinics, again, same kind of question. All of that is in the works right now. We don't have good answers on copyright information. So that is going to be a challenge for us. And it is something that we need to be aware of and have conversations with our organizations about how we want to use it and what that looks like. ChatGPT scraping information from other places, different from someone being inspired by someone else. That is a great question. And that is one that is in balance right now. We all do that, right? When I go to write something, I look at all of the trusted resources that I know, and I look at what are they covering? How are they covering it? How can I make sure I'm saying the correct information, but saying it in a new way? Now I'm doing it digitally. You know, when I, as an organization, put something out on a website, I have given you permission to look at that. If they're using unpublished books, or if you're looking at the programs where they're scraping on the web artists that have copyright images that they're sharing on the web, but they haven't given you permission to use them in this way, that stuff hasn't been worked out yet. So in terms of the imagery, we have to be really, really careful. It looks like we are coming to a close. I could talk about this all day. I love to talk about it. I hope this was helpful and got you thinking. I also will be checking the questions, so you can look in the platform and I will answer questions there. It looks like there are a few that I didn't get to. And please reach out to me. I would be more than happy to continue this conversation. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you.